Brilliant, thank you very much. So just as a reminder, I'm Emmanuel Inwang. I'm the founder and director of an organisation called Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust. And Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust was set up a few years ago in order to open children's homes in areas of need and improve the outcomes for looked after children in children's homes. So what I'm going to do is speak about some of the work that we've been doing in our children's homes with the design of our model to try and improve outcomes for children and prevent some of the criminalisation that Laura was just speaking about. So my previous career before being director of Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust was as a teacher, and I'm sad to inform you all have a test. It's not really a test, just a bit of audience participation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a statistic up on the PowerPoint. And if you know what that statistic relates to, I just want you to shout it out. So the first statistic relating to children's homes and the criminalisation of children in children's homes is 17 times. What do we think that that relates to? Just shout it out. Any takers? Not quite. Not quite. All right. Sorry? Arrested? Close. So children who grow up in children's homes are 17 times more likely to be criminalised than the non-looked after peers. 17 times more likely to be criminalised than the non-looked after peers. We've got another statistic. I'm going to give you a clue. It's actually slightly out of date because these are taken from the Howard League's 2019 statistics. And Laura did just mention it. So 49%. And it relates to all children in care. Yeah, so we characterise statistic as those who have been formally criminalised with a care background. So it's 49% in 2019, but from what Laura is saying, it's actually gone up to about 59% today.
In a custodial setting.
Yeah, exactly. The next stat is 71%. This is a pretty tricky one. Okay, all right, I'm going to give it to you. So this is the number of children, the proportion of children who come into a care setting as a result of family dysfunction or neglect. The reason why I share this statistic is because lots of people think that children end up in children's homes as a result of participating in criminal activities before they come into care. And that's not the case at all. The vast majority of children who end up in children's homes are there as a result of abuse and neglect. And a lot of that criminalisation comes at a later stage. The next one is 23,000, and once again, Laura was just talking about this in her speech. 23,000. Close again, in the right neighbourhood. Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. It's the number of annual police call-outs to children's homes last year. So there were 23,000 annual call-outs to children's homes in this country last year. A lot of the time it's because of the things that Laura spoke about, like very low-level incidents that staff don't necessarily have the confidence to deal with. And in a moment, I'm going to speak about some of the things that we've put in place to try and prevent those sorts of things from happening. So a little bit about my background. As I said before, my previous career was as a teacher. So between 2011 and 2014, I did something known as the Teach-First Leadership Development Programme. And what Teach-First does is it takes people who are usually early career graduates, and it sends them to teach in a random part of the country, usually in a low-income school. One of the reasons I became interested in this area, because I ended up teaching lots of looked-after children who are underperforming academically. So between 2014 and 2016, I put together a group of people who are involved in Teach First and establish what's known as the Teach First Care Network to try and figure out what we could do to improve children in care's educational attainment. That ended up taking on a much, much wider remit, and we became quite interested in children's homes because the outcomes for those children seem to be particularly poor. Between 2017 and 2018, I ended up volunteering a lot in children's homes across the country, mainly as an English tutor, but often just going to children's homes and helping out where I could. I took a lot of what I saw and wrote up a brief report around some of the challenges, and I'm going to go through those in a moment, some of the challenges that I saw in children's homes across the UK. But I also went over to Germany and Denmark because the outcomes for children over there tend to be much, much better in the UK, and they have much, much lower levels of criminalisation over there as well. So I thought it would be interesting to see what they're doing and see whether we can incorporate some of that into our practice in the UK. So in July 2018, I took all that research from the UK and Germany and Denmark and founded the Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust on the basis of that research. And last year, February, we opened Treehouse, which is our first children's home. So a bit about some of the challenges that we saw in children's homes. I think a lot of these challenges are some of the driving factors behind why we see such high levels of criminalisation. And one of those key things was turnover and training. And what's interesting about turnover in the UK is at the moment it stands at about 38%. So 38% of staff who are working in the children's home this year will not be there next year. And we know how important things like attachment are when it comes to children in children's homes, but children are witnessing all these people coming in, trying to build connections and relationships with them, and then leaving quite soon after. So this is something that we wanted to address and tackle. And the other thing is training. I think one of the reasons why you see people calling the police when a child's potentially pushing past them or going into an office is a lack of training and support. And those are things that are really important to have in place. Another thing was institutionalisation. I did visit lots of children's homes that were really lovely, really nice, really homely and welcoming. But I visited too many that were quite institutionalised, you know, massive fire exit signs on the wall, ringing of bells, jingling of keys. It gives you a sort of atmosphere like being in a prison. And this is something that we really have to tackle and deal with. And what we also say at Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust is that something that feels like an institution isn't just the space, it's also the relationships. Too many relationships in children's homes are transactional. We wanted to make sure that they were genuine relationships that people are building together. The other thing is education and mental health. We know that mental health is a massive driver behind criminalisation, but we're not always providing the support, the training necessary to support that. And one of the big things was that we didn't seem to have a real evidence base in this country as to what works, what actually works in terms of reducing the criminalisation of children. And how do we share that so that we all understand what we should be doing? I just wanted to really briefly talk about one of the children's homes that I visited in Denmark because we were heavily influenced by the work that they were doing in this home. It's called Josephine Snyder House. It has pretty much 0 levels of criminalisation. It's been open for about 100 years. And there were so many things that they were doing in that home that I thought were so important for us to do here in the UK. One of those things was around how they recruit, train, and then retain staff. I remember somebody was complaining about the fact that some of their newer staff had only been there for a brief period. These staff have been there for 5 years. And I had to explain that actually in the UK, working in residential care for 5 years would be seen as being a veteran. So staff tend to go into the sector and work there for their entire careers. And what they're able to do is build up a massive knowledge base that they can then use and apply to reduce that criminalisation and improve the outcomes of those children. Another thing, and this is why I wanted to show pictures, is the space just looks beautiful. The children want to be there. It's really lovely, it's really homely. There are lots of opportunities for children to do things together with adults. And if you're keeping those children nearby and interacting with them, you're reducing the chances of them potentially being influenced by people that you don't necessarily want them to interact with. The other thing was there was a really clear purpose to what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They were really trying to make sure that these children had the same opportunities as other children in the country, and everything that they did was driven towards focusing on that. And the other thing was they used a method of practice called social pedagogy. Some of you who work in residential care may have come across that. It is the main method of practice in Germany and Denmark and many other European countries. It's not really used here in the UK, and it has lots of similarities to things like PACE and trauma-informed care, but it's really great at incorporating all of the things that we can learn from those sorts of methods into a broader system. And so at Lighthouse Pedagogy Trust, we have a clear vision, and that vision is that we believe that children in care should have the same opportunities as everyone else. So similar to Denmark, everything that we do is focused towards that. So what we try to do is create children's homes where children can thrive and where education is central to a very holistic approach. Our entire approach is informed by social pedagogy, which is a relationship-based way of working with children, because we think that's the mechanism by which we can engage with children. We invest in really great staff, so we have really high barriers to entry. But we invest in them because we feel that they're able to build authentic relationships in thoughtfully designed physical spaces. And we also use our learning to train people and influence decision makers so that we can improve standards of care necessary. And the reason why we say that is because we think there's lots of really great practice taking place in this country, but we're not getting together enough to share our learning. So our model is based on 4 key principles, which we call the 4 Ps. People, place, purpose, and pedagogy. And we think by doing those 4 things really, really well, we can improve the outcomes of children and reduce things like criminalisation. So I'm just going to highlight a few things that we do in each one of those areas. In terms of what we're actually doing, there's huge amounts of detail in terms of practice and what we get people to do. But just to highlight a few things in relation to the criminalisation of children in care. Once again, we think it's really important that we recruit carefully selected and really well-trained staff. So we put a huge amount of investment into all of our staff. And that's both at the selection stage. We have a 4-stage process. People have to come back on multiple days and take a lot of tests in order to be able to get a place on our team. And our team is very, very well trained. So most of our practitioners do a qualification up to a level 5. Most training in residential care in the UK is around about a level 3. We're also working with universities to develop degree courses that people can participate in. Interestingly enough, we feel that based on our research that having a mixture of genders in children's homes actually helps. So what's interesting in the UK is the majority of children in children's homes are boys, but the majority of staff tend to be women. But by having a mixture of staff, we can make sure that those boys are getting really positive role models. And we encourage lots of our male staff to nurture in a very masculine way so those boys can have that positive role model. We also feel that confident leadership is really important. And this is one of the areas where we may be walking into a bit of a crisis. 14% of children's homes in this country do not have a qualified manager. And that's only going to get worse over time because we're not generating enough people who can be really great leaders in children's homes. So we're looking at that as an issue as well. Another thing that we think is really important is what we call place. So having a really good understanding of the local area and potential risks. And that's some of the formal things. So obviously we speak to police, we speak to other agencies and organisations that interact with our children. But we also spend a lot of time speaking to neighbours, chatting over the fence, what's going on locally, what do we know about, and we use that knowledge to inform our practice. We think it's really important to have a really nice, homely environment for children to come back to. And interestingly enough, to bring their friends into as well, because if they're under our roof and we're looking after them, then they're not necessarily out on the streets interacting with people that we don't necessarily want them to. And also, we think it's important to have children's homes close to the places where children are from. And we know, lots of you will know the statistic that about half the children who are placed into children's homes are placed outside the local authority. It's much worse in London. London only has about a third of the children's home places that it needs because it's expensive to set up. In Sutton, where we are, we were the first children's home to open in about 10 years. All of those children in Sutton were either in the northeast of England or in Wales, which is far away from their home environment. So we wanted to set up children's homes in places where they're actually needed. So when children move into them, they can stay in the same schools, they can see their families, and they can see their friends. In terms of purpose, it's about having a focus on supporting children with their education, lots of local amenities and things for children to do. When I was visiting a lot of children's homes, in some of them, staff were spending up to about 80% of their time doing paperwork because there was so much of it. We developed systems so that staff can spend 80% of their time interacting with children because that's really what we wanted to do. That's why people come into the sector. And also helping children to understand themselves and the world around them. In terms of social pedagogy, we have a keen focus on relationships. We like social pedagogy because it provides a shared framework and a language for decision-making. We can incorporate lots of these other methods and practices, and also it's helping us to build an evidence base as to what actually works in this country. I know I've been speaking for a while, so I'm going to skip the next step and just show you a few pictures. And I thought it was really important to just go through the actual physical environment of the home because we actually think it's quite important in terms of keeping children there. And also it's been really carefully designed to ensure that it provides all of the opportunities that we need for children to engage well. So this space is what we call the green room in our home. It's actually our education space. And it's specifically designed so that when children come into the home, they're often out of school. So we have a specific place in the home where they can do their education, they can be supported by staff as well. So this is the living room, really nice, really cosy. Even things like the furniture have been selected very carefully. It's done to an exceptionally high standard. So it's just won its third Royal Institute of British Architects award. It won the most prestigious London Award very, very recently. And the reason why we put so much effort and energy and actually money into developing a space like that is because we think it sends a signal to children, and we've seen that. And it sends a signal that we care about you, you're important, this is your home, this is your space, and there are people here who really love you. And it's really actually wonderful to see children bringing their friends into the home and showing them the space, and they're always quite gobsmacked when they walk into the space. So this is our kitchen and dining area. It provides lots of opportunities for children to interact with staff. It tends to be where everybody goes at the end of the day, usually looking for a muffin or some biscuits. We also have a dining room which is next to it, with a bespoke table that everybody can sit around. We have a principle in our home where we try and do everything as much as possible in a way that a typical family would. And one of those things is eating meals together. So when it gets to dinner time in our home, if you ever visit and it comes to dinner time, everybody sat down having dinner together, because that's what a family would do. It allows us to check in with the kids, see where they are, to also find out those things that we need to know about if there are places where we need to intervene. And then this is one of the bedrooms, and I just wanted to quickly show you the space at the top of the home. So this is the living room for our flat at the top, and actually this is one of the other ways in which we are working to reduce criminalisation of children in care. So up until recently, most children leaving children's homes were expected to leave at the age of 16. When I was a teacher, I would never have allowed my year 11s to have lived on their own, essentially, and to fend for themselves, especially if they came from quite vulnerable backgrounds. But until recently, we're doing that quite a lot. It's still the case that we do expect children to leave at the age of 18, often with very little and very few opportunities. So we've developed a space. It's a 2-bedroom flat on the top floor of our building where children can move into and stay through up until the age of 19. And that means that they have a home for as long as they need it. We can continue to support them. And because we know from the data that a lot of children start slipping into the cracks, slipping into criminalisation between the ages of 16 and 18, we can bridge that gap and keep them close. We think that we can prevent that. So thank you very much for listening so carefully. And if you want to contact me, those are my details. Thank you.